vacuums in fragile or failing states. Of course, Muslims feel hurt when the Prophet, may peace be upon him, is depicted. At the heart of this matter is the issue of graven images, which Muslims share with people of the book. When Palestinians continue to suffer as a result of the Zionist project, which seems unstoppable in its ambitions, when Muslim residents and citizens of the West are profiled through Islamophobia, but the argument should be one with wisdom and the prophetic capacity to endure and to maintain the dignity and the Muslim dignity in the face of hurt and anger. It is not enough for Muslim communities to distance ourselves from them. The extremists distort the values of Islam, its teachings, and our very identity. It is also important to disarm the counterpart extremists, those extremists against Muslims. They are the mirror images of the Muslim extremists that they purport to combat. They create the fertile terrain for recruitment in Muslim communities and nations. And we need to inculcate values based upon Islamic history, knowledge and tradition, and nurture a culture of freedom and human rights. Our silence should not be interpreted as a mandate to murder, kidnap schoolgirls, raise Sufi mosques, or encourage sectarian attacks, whether they be against Shias or whether they be against Sunnis, against Christians, or other people of the book, or even the Druze and the Yazidis sects. The Ba'athists, in fact, should also not be executed. The South African experience is important here. We crafted a constitution that granted rights and responsibilities to all citizens. We devoted a considerable amount of resources, both human and financial, to ensure that communities live in harmony, and did not encourage provocation of any persons of any faith or any cultural background. The South African Constitution has a limitation clause that could be used to curb excesses on the right to freedom of speech, if such action is intended to foster racial, tribal, or sectarian strife. The international community should consider extending the provisions that curb hate and specifically anti-Semitic speech that should be applicable to all communities, that all communities should not be suffering from hate speech or any cultural group speech or any anti-race group speech or any anti-tribe speech. And I think if we look at these issues and look at them forwardly, not only from this conference, but make recommendations that we take this forward, possibly we can look at stopping the kind of things that we saw that are happening in Paris, the kind of things that are still happening in Iraq, the kind of things that happened very recently in Nigeria. And with that, I want to appeal to conference attendees to actually look, to reflect, and to come up with solutions that can take us forward, A, as a country, B, as a community within this country, and B, as a global community within the world. I thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Mohammed, for those very useful comments that you made at the opening of this conference. Before I introduce Usamah Hamdan, let me say that I'm sure that many of you know there's a very visible controversy taking place at the moment because a South African organization has invited Leila Khalid to visit South Africa in 2 months' time in March. Perhaps strangely, we didn't have the same kind of thing with the invitation of Usamah Hamdan. I'm sure, however, that those objections are just not very visible, but that they are there. I'm sure that there have been, just as in the case of Leila Khalid, attempts to convince the South African government that his visa should be withdrawn, etc. Unfortunately, people who make, or fortunately perhaps, people who make such demands don't realize what it means to live in a free society, I guess. Let me say, however, that we did not choose Usamah Hamdan to be the keynote speaker for this conference because he's Palestinian or because he belongs to any particular Palestinian faction. We decided on him because he represents a movement that arguably falls into all three of the main categories of political Islam that we will be discussing at this conference, in some or other way, whether tenuously or not. Hamas is a social movement, as well as a militant organization that believes that armed struggle is an important component of its strategy and tactics, and controls something of a state-like structure. State-like because, frankly, neither Gaza nor the Palestinian Authority as a whole is a state. At best, it is a form of a Bantustan. And here I have succeeded in uniting both Hamas and Fatah in objecting to what I am saying. Nevertheless, Hamas has played that role of falling, in a sense, into those three categories: social movement, militant organization, and governance. It is also a movement that has a mature understanding of principles, strategies, and tactics, and in those understandings can contribute to the substance of this conference. And that's why it's very relevant that Usamah Hamdan be the keynote speaker for this conference and for this evening. Mr. Hamdan is the most senior representative of the Islamic resistance movement Hamas in Lebanon. A former head of international relations for the organization, he's also a member of Hamas's politburo. He's a member of the Arab National Congress and the Arab Islamic Conference, and a member of the board of trustees of the Jerusalem Institute in Lebanon. He was born in the Bureij refugee camp in Gaza. His family had fled the village of Al-Batani al-Sharqi during the 1948 war. Since then, since leaving Gaza, he has lived in Kuwait, Jordan, Iran, and Lebanon. From 1994 to 1998, he was Hamas's chief representative in Iran. And with that introduction, I call Usamah Hamdan to address us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Well, I think that the term political Islam is a tricky term. I mostly don't agree with this term because it was defined by some people who do not understand our community, our beliefs, and our Islam as we do. Maybe they use that term under the influence of their history and culture in the mid-centuries in Europe. What does it mean in the political Islam? I think there is no clear definition for this word or for this term. I prefer to use the term of movements bases themselves to Islam. And then we can talk about a wide, different range of movements. Movements who adopt the reform in their own communities on the basis of Islam. Movements who are only political movements. Other resistance movements, some called jihadist movements, and maybe more than this, which I will define by the end of my speech, Al-Khawarij, new Khawarij movements. In fact, the Islamic community have known a special political history from the beginning. The political Islam started with the first constitution in Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, when the state was established by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was not called an Islamic state. And the constitution at that time defined the citizenship for all the people who were living in Al-Madinah, not only the Muslims, even the Jews who were there. He considered them as the Muslims have the same rights and the same responsibilities. وَبَنِي عَوْفٍ, their grandfather, Bani Auf, أُمَّةٌ مَعَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, they are a nation with the Muslims, not separated, not divided. The same community includes Muslims and Jews at that time. That was the first political sign for the Islam as a religion. the first formation of a political party, it was after that of 40 years. Al-Khawarij, who did not accept to be with Ali or Muawiyah, who were at that time the major leaders of the Islamic community. And they worked to change the situation by the idea of assassination. They decided to assassinate Ali, Muawiyah, and Amr ibn al-As. They succeed with Ali, and they did not succeed with Muawiyah. That was the first political, if I want to say, party adopts violence inside the Islamic community. And in fact, everyone talks about the fight between Ali and Muawiyah, and no one realized that most of the fight was between Ali and the Khawarij, because he doesn't consider them as real Muslims who act according to Islam. After the massacre of Karbala, the second political party was formed. It was formed from the Alawists, who support the sons of Ali and the grandsons of Ali, and their cousins, the sons of Al-Abbas. This political party worked secretly against the government, which was at that time the Umayyads, and they succeed in bringing that state down, and they formed their new state, the Abbasis. During the Umayyad period, the majority of the population deals with the Khalifa as a governing system, leading the country for the benefit of Islam, although the Khalifa and most of the people working with him were not considered as the best example for Muslims on the individual level. But everyone accepts them because it was the sign of the unity of the Muslims. They have one Khalifa, one governing system. On the side of this governing system, there was a new system which grows, which is known by our terms the civil community system. It starts from that time. Maybe it starts as charities, but after that it developed, and that was according to the Islamic beliefs. And after a period, it develops to be a kind of what is known as nasiha, the advice for the people who are in power. This second party, the Alawists, as I said, they formed their state, and according to that formation, there was differences between the cousins. They were divided, and then the Alawists, they were out of the government, and they were the opposition, and it was a civil opposition. It was not a violent opposition. In those days of the Abbasis, there was a formation of a new political party by the seventh Khalifa of the Abbasists, Al-Ma'mun. We have a new term, Ahl Sunnah. It was related to religion, but it was also a political movement led by Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And that make a new addition to the Islamic community. We had the Shia, and then we had Ahl Sunnah after that. During this period, there was a clear separation between the community and the government. And the civil community started to grow more and more. And it was very effective. We had some signs in that, like Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, who opposes the government, and they make the needed changes. But all those actions were kind of reforms. A big question will be asked now: what about the Khawarij, who started their first political party? In every century there was a kind of Khawarij. For example, in the Abbasid period, they were known as Al-Qaramita. They attacked Mecca during the Hajj. They killed the Muslims who were there. They killed more than 30,000 Muslims there. And for 8 years, there was no Hajj because they prevented that. What I meant to say, there is some groups, some organizations, they claim that they are based on Islam, but they act even against the very simple basis of Islam. It's not accepted to consider them as part of political Islam just because they are saying that we are connected to Islam. I believe maybe the one who used the term of political Islam did not mean that, but some politicians are using that against the whole concept of the idea having Islamists in politics working for the benefit of their countries and people, or maybe governing their countries. According to that, what I want to say, as Muslims, we have a long history in the political work, in the social work, in the reform work inside our communities. And that's clear. If we went through that history, we can define all the organizations, we can define all the ideas on this basis. I want to turn to the future from this long history. At the beginnings of this century, the last century, 20th century, the Islamists or the Muslims faced a very important challenge: the dissolve of the Khilafah, which was uniting the Muslims all over the world. The dissolve of the Khilafah and the creation of the national countries. That was an important and a big challenge for the Muslims. Maybe it was simple to have such change in other places. I want to give an example. In Malaysia, for example, 4 years after that, there was a resistance against the British occupation. They used the flag of the Ottoman Khilafah as their sign, as their flag. There was a challenge for the Muslims how to deal with this. And they dealt with that in a very strange but useful way. They concentrated not on politics. They start to concentrate on protecting the individuals, the people. So they acted firstly as reformists to protect the community. Their slogan was, if we lost the persons, we will lose the future. According to that, they work as social movements, as reformists, and they did not work in politics, in fact. And whenever they tried to work in politics, they were part of the national work, like in the revolutions in Syria, in North Africa. They were not considered separated from their communities. In fact,